I just had a great idea for a storage shelf, where the shelves actually support and hold up the legs just as much as the legs support and hold up the shelves. But I've never tried this before. And if I build this in full scale, say 6 or 8 feet tall, and it doesn't work out, well, that's a lot of time and wasted money. But instead, let's build a scaled down version, say like quarter size. That way, if this concept does work out, not only do we have a great idea, but we have a little display shelf as well. So here's a quick measurement of a standard shelf, which is 6 foot by 4 foot by 2 foot, will now be 18 inches by 12 inches by 6 inches. And your standard 2x4 will now be 3/8 by 7/8. And that means I'm going to have to rip down a bunch of boards on the table saw to those dimensions. But if you want to do something similar, you don't have to do that. You could always run out and grab you a bunch of furring strips, which are 1.5 by about 3/4, and this will allow you to do a much smaller scale, trying to test out some of your ideas. The wood I'm going to use for this project is just a basic pine. Now I do have to avoid these large knots, so this end will have to be cut off. These smaller knots like these, not a problem, that should be fine, but definitely cut these off. And using that one 2x4, I was able to cut out 10 strips at those dimensions, and I believe that'd be the exact number I need for this build. Now if you cut down a bunch of boards just like this, you'll notice, like I am right now, if there's a bunch of little imperfections. I got knots missing and grooves and little missed like shapes in them, but that's okay, because if we're building on a large scale with regular 2x4s, they're not going to be perfect either. So these should work great. I'm first going to cut down the legs, and so I picked out the 4 nicest boards because I'm going to have to do some cuts in these later, and I don't want to have to worry about hitting too many knots. So I've clamped them together to make sure everything's nice and square, so I can cut them all at the same time. Then I'm going to need to cut out 8 pieces at 12 inches. This will be for the front of the shelf and for the back of the shelf. Now for the size of our shelf, I can't actually cut them down to 6 inches because we have to take into consideration the thickness of the front and back boards. Now 3/8 and 3/8 added together is 3/4, so we need to cut down each of the side pieces at 5 1/4. To assemble each of these shelves, we're going to lay out the sides first and then take the front and back and kind of sandwich them in between, making sure to keep them as square as possible. I'm going to use my cutting mat here to kind of keep them square. If you don't have anything like that, you may want to get a corner square to make sure everything is in alignment when you attach them together. And to keep these shelves together, I'm going to use some glue and some really short brad nails. With all 4 shelves complete, I am moving back to the legs, which I have taped all together, making sure they're nice and even on all sides because I have to make several identical cuts in all 4 of these. And to make these cuts, I'm going to use my table saw sled, and you're going to notch out little dados in 4 locations on these legs so they can slide directly over the shelves. Here's a lesson I just learned about these scale down models. If you're doing dados or cuts like this, if you get it just right, everything's gonna move exactly where you want it. But if you just barely, and I mean barely, cut something too big, it's going to show a dramatic amount of movement that shouldn't be there. So I just have to remember that the tolerances on these smaller pieces have to be a lot tighter than on the larger units. So there's a very good chance that these smaller pieces will have a little bit more movement than the larger versions. To assemble these shelves, I'm going to lay these out like I would if they were full size, thus on their backs. And then I'm going to take one of the legs and I'm going to place it sideways, trying to encompass each of the shelves with the dados we did. Then work our third one into place, and then work our fourth one into place. Then I'm going to take another leg, the one, oh no, this is what I had a fear of. Let me show you. As I was trying to assemble the legs on the shelves, you can see here I accidentally broke the bottom of this leg. I had a feeling because this is such a small little piece that could happen, so we're going to have to glue that back together. While that piece is drying, let me show you how I'm going to set these legs up. If you look closely, these back legs are actually facing to the sides, and these front legs, I'm actually going to face them toward the front. The reason for the different directions in the legs is I'm hoping that the back legs will keep it from racking from side to side and that the front legs will keep it from racking forward and back. But I won't know for sure until it's done. Once all the legs are wedged into place, it's now time to raise it up. In a real world, I know this will be quite heavy and you might need a second person, but you might also be able to just grab these front legs, pivot it up on the back legs into the standing position. Do you remember when I said that the legs would support the shelves and that the shelves would support the legs? Well, I'm going to do that with the top of our shelves. For this full-size shelving unit, I'd strongly suggest using 3/4 inch plywood for its strength in holding everything in position. Now, converting that down to a 1/4 inch scale converts down to about 3/16, and I found the closest thing I could find, which this is saying it's 5 millimeter, but when I measure it, it's just barely over 3/16, so that's what I'm going to use. After getting these cut to size, I taped them together and I've carefully measured out each of the corners because some of these are 7/8 and some of them are 3/4, and I want to make sure I got all those dimensions correct. To trim out these corners, there's a bunch of ways you can cut it out. The hand saw, maybe the table saw. I'm just going to use the bandsaw. To get each of these shelves into place, we can't go in through the front. There's just not enough room, and there's definitely not enough room in the back. So we're gonna have to go in from the sides. Just angle it up, and it might take a little bit of work, but it should fit in there. And once you have it past the legs, we're gonna have to wedge it against the inside of all the legs. In this case, it's going in nicely. Some of these others might be a little more challenging. Now for the moment of truth. Let's see how stable this thing is. Well, it's a little uneven. The whole thing is rocking back and forth, not the frame here. I got a craft stick. I'm going to stick it under one of the legs to see if that'll stabilize it, at least enough for this test. Okay, it's at least even. Somewhere along the lines, one of the legs is maybe a little bit too short, or a piece of wood is warped, causing it to rock back and forth. With the full-size unit, I'm not too concerned. The weight will keep it down. Now let's see if this thing is going to rack side to side at all. Wow, very little. That's awesome. Let's see about forward and back. There's a little bit there, as you can tell. So would this actually work in the real world, in full size, so we can have a knockdown full-size shelf? I'm not 100% sure yet. I did learn that the tolerances on this unit have to be a heck of a lot tighter than the tolerances on the larger unit, so that might be part of my problem and why I don't feel 100% sure on this. But I would love to know your thoughts on this unit. Would this be a great knockdown shelf, or would it just be something that's just a novelty, something you just see in concept like this? I don't know. You tell me. I'd love to know your thoughts. Also, do you think in a bigger size, would this rack more, or would it actually be more stable because of the weight? I don't know. Please let me know. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. Otherwise, check out this next video.